We are on. No, thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and get started. You have all been very successful in your careers, both on the field and off the field. At what point in your athletic career did you realize the opportunities outside of your sports? Nasty.
Gosh, I think for me it wasn't until it was actually happening because both my parents were gymnasts. My dad competed at the 88 games, won 2 gold and 2 silver medals. My mom was a rhythmic gymnast world champion, so as the only child, I had some pretty good genes, but I think that I truly always did the sport because I loved it. I never did it for the opportunities, for a career or for anything like that. And I think it has. We were just talking about this. It's changed so much with social media, just for starters, and competing in '08 in Beijing. I didn't have social media, not to outdate myself here, but I think that's maybe also why in the moment I didn't quite realize what was happening. I was there for a dream and a goal and to fulfill that goal.
Yeah, for me in the world of women's basketball, it's been such an evolution of the sport. So actually early on, I was drafted in 2002. Early on, I had a lot of opportunities off the court, whether it was marketing, you name it. So I kind of got a taste of it, but then there was a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a plateau. Like I said, it's been an evolution. And then I would say around 2018, it started to pick back up again. 2020 into 2021, it really started to hit a totally different stride. And that's when, well, very quickly, the life of a women's basketball player, you play in the WNBA, you also play overseas, and that can be a year-round thing. So at some point in that time frame, a little bit sooner, like 2014-15, I also stopped playing overseas. So I did have a lot of time at home that I wasn't playing. So I would say the combination of all of that made me think like, okay, I need to start planning, I need to start capitalizing on these opportunities, but what can I do to set myself up when I'm retired? So somewhere in there.
Yeah, I mean, similar for me. I feel like, definitely in my sport, but I feel like for a lot of female professional athletes, there's always this like entrepreneurial, mostly by like necessity, or DIY, or like we have to fight for a better CBA, or fighting abuse allegations. So there's always this like, we have to do it ourselves, and that kind of spirit. And I feel like just when, people started to invest in women's sports more, I mean, for me, I think it was probably 2015, 16, 17, when that really started to happen in the, way of more brand deals or more sponsorships. And then I think around 2017, I was kind of like, oh, like I can be doing some of this myself. Like this is not a very good creative. Let me try to get in on that. And I think that sort of parlayed into, eventually having my own business or hiring my own people, or thinking about my sport or myself in my sport more as a business, and what does that look like? And now we have a production company and we have a podcast and things that we own ourselves. And so I think it was sort of like the rise of investment in women's sports in general. And then it was like, oh, well, I can do this. I mean, these people are doing it. I can do it also.
Now, Megan, you spoke about DIY and setting up business. How did you educate yourself about setting up these businesses outside your sport?
I think the education came from necessity. I mean, I think my first education, and even just like an organizational structure, was like, okay, what is a CBA? Like, what does that look like? What is a marketing agreement? And you sort of have to learn those things. And it was like, okay, what is a business structure? What does that look? Even like putting our PA together, or putting the for-profit part of our PA together. Part of that was just like understanding what it was so that we could get the best deal. And I think from there, I think athletes always have an amazing opportunity to be in rooms with like the craziest people, from like CEOs of companies to presidents to CMOs of companies. So we're always around that. I was always just really interested in that and trying to understand the business a little better. I think I kind of realized early on, like, I am the business. Like, I'm the product. So obviously these people are making money off of me. So I think just realizing that really quickly and trying to find the areas, as I grew and got smarter and learned more, like, where can I take something back? Where can I take something back? And, trying to honestly take everything back. eventually.
Sue as well. How did you educate yourself outside of your sport?
There's actually one moment that I can think back on and realize it was a little bit of a turning point on how I viewed myself, how I viewed women's athletes, and it was actually also during a CBA negotiation. The WNBA, I was on the executive committee, and we negotiated with the league right before the pandemic. So I think technically it got signed in like January of 2020. Obviously, everything changed after that. But in that negotiation, it was my first time being in this room, where across from me are members of the WNBA league office, whether it's the commissioner herself or other people, and then there's also these owners, right? And a lot of the owners in the WNBA are incredibly successful business people, like across the board in so many different places of work, different businesses. And I think when I walked in the room at first, I thought to myself like, ooh, they're probably smarter than I am. They probably know a lot more than I do. But then as we started getting into the nitty-gritty of the negotiation, it started to swing back to me where I was like, wait a minute, I know more about all of this than any of them do. And obviously that's because it's my life. Yep. It's my experience. It's what I saw day to day. They just really didn't have an understanding. And I started to develop a confidence about me in those rooms. And I started to understand that only I, with my experience, again, with my, I like to call it an expertise in the world of women's sports, especially basketball, I was now like, wait a minute, I'm actually the smartest person in the room. And that really helped change how I approached everything in my world and what is specific to my business. And again, I think it comes back to having a confidence, because at times as athletes, we aren't really treated that way. You know, what do you always hear? Not necessarily now, but historically, like, oh, the dumb athlete, or like, oh, what'd you major in? You know, probably, and it's true, I majored in communications because it was the easiest, but
it's worked out.
Yeah, but that's changing, and now I finally have that confidence, or I gained that in 2019.
And Nastia, how about yourself? Coming from gymnastics, how did you educate yourself, building your business and your brand?
Well, I think, maybe different from other sports, we're so young, and so you're almost not even thinking about that. Again, like for me competing at the Olympics, I just kind of did it because I loved it. I wanted to do it. My dad was my coach. I wanted to make him proud. Like, I wasn't thinking about anything else. I had a Wheaties box that was shown to me in the back room, and I was just like, oh, that's cool. Wheaties is my favorite cereal now, and I think it was just, there wasn't as much education, and God bless my parents, they tried as hard as they could, but they also didn't grow up in this country, and sure, they won Olympic gold medals, but it gave them nothing, and they moved to this country with no pennies, nothing, speaking no English as their language. They had just a dream. And so I think for me, I just grew up watching, and the older you get, the more you appreciate it, but I grew up watching them, achieve their dreams with nothing and kind of like making the impossible come true. And so I guess for me, it was more so similar being in rooms where you didn't necessarily feel like you were the smartest, but you were just absorbing everything. And I think like being around just more educated people, and I don't mean more educated than whether it was myself or my family, but it was just more different types of education. I could educate, hopefully, all of you guys on the balance beam. But that was the only world that I knew in that moment. And so I think once I, training 7 hours a day, 6 days a week since 5th grade. How old are you in 5th grade? 10-ish? Yeah, okay. So I started training 7 hours a day when I was 10 years old. So I didn't necessarily have another life, I guess. And I think once I was able to step outside of that, it wasn't until after the Olympics, until after I won, that then I was, having conversations that didn't include a triple twist dismount and what leotard I was wearing the next day, and, or what pose I wanted on the Wheaties box. Like, those were the things that I was answering. So I think it was just immersing myself into those rooms, those conversations. And, I think as athletes, we're also very driven, I would say, and to a certain extent, whether you want to call it a control freak or not, but I think similar to you, Megan, it was very like, okay, they're telling my story or, pitching me or whatever, but could do it better, or I could, maybe add on to that, or maybe I should suggest this, have they ever thought about that? And so just really being more involved. And I think once I became way more involved, because I thought at the beginning that you just weren't supposed to be. Again, my parents didn't have an agent. My parents had nothing like that. So I think just getting my hands, kind of just being more involved, I guess, in the conversations that were being had.
No, that's great. There's a common theme about taking ownership and you guys being the CEO and knowing yourself better than these brands know yourselves. What's your approach and goal when business opportunities come your way? Sue, I'll start with you.
My goal?
And your approach.
My approach? Well, I think when it comes to partnering with anyone, you want to make sure your values are aligned. That's first and foremost. I think the thing that I would argue that most female athletes have learned is authenticity is so important. I know I can speak for myself. There were times in my basketball career where I was being asked to market myself more feminine, be more girly, by sex sells. This was in my early days. And the truth is people can kind of smell the bullshit, I always kind of think of it when you had a substitute teacher, when it's not, or if your coach, for us, it's no, seriously though, for us, it's when the coach, something happens and the coach can't be there that day, the head coach, and it's an assistant, you're kind of what? Yeah, it's a substitute teacher, it's just something's not hitting. Anyways, so with that, I've learned this authenticity piece is so important. So really every decision that I make personally, obviously Megan and I are in business together now. We have some joint businesses, so every decision we make together, a lot of it has to do with just being authentic, making sure values align. And then from there, you can kind of figure everything else out, right? Even if you're not in total alignment, you're not the values part, maybe the direction or a certain decision, or you're not in total agreement. You can kind of figure that out because you have this foundation of alignment.
Megan, how do you get to total alignment?
Yeah, I think that what you just said, Sue, about the values and the mission and why are we doing it, that's the most important part. Being lucky enough to play for a really long time, and get the tail end of women's sports exploding, and being able to make a little bit of money. We don't have to do a ton of things, so we really get the opportunity to choose. So it's where do you actually want to spend your time? Where do you want to put your passion? Are you even interested in it? I think that really matters, to be honest. We are so lucky as athletes to, yes, you do have to put the time in. You talked about your training schedule, and it really is a total commitment, mind, body, soul commitment to be an athlete, but we love it. And so it's worth it. And I feel when you retire, it becomes very clear very quickly when it's not worth it. You're oh my God, this is terrible. Why am I doing this? I don't want to spend my time doing this. So to have the mission part, for me, it's are we definitely, if it involves sports, it's going to be women's sports. Are we working, to advance a narrative, or are we working for more equality, or are we, just looking to build the business around women's sports? That's really important. I think for me personally, I'm where's the ownership piece? Because I know what I bring and the value that I have that sometimes is sort of intangible. And if I'm not going to be able to participate in the upside or the potential of the, product or the business or the brand, what do you, I'm just getting X fee and then you're going to be the one making, if the fee's high enough, sometimes the fee's just high enough and it's just high enough. But I think in general, it's where's the ownership part? Because this is my IP of my lived experience. This is what I know. And women's sports has been, neglected, frankly, for so long. And I think there's so much money coming in and so many brands, businesses, people, whatever it is, that really don't have the knowledge necessary to storytell in the right way, to market in the right way, and to really have that authenticity that Sue's talking about. So I know what I can bring to it, and so I want to participate in that. And then I touched on a little bit, just do I want to do it? Do I enjoy working with the people? Is it either a brand or a business or an idea that I really like, that I think is going to have a positive impact in the world and on women's sports and the things that I care about? And it's kind of simple from there.
I'm just about to say, it's the simplicity of, do you actually like the brand, the product, I think so often in this world of digital and social media, it just, you almost lose sight of, the actual reality of, do I like this brand? Do I like this product? Do my missions align with their missions? Because for me personally, like you want to be proud of anything that your name is attached to, whether, it's a huge fee that you're just like, okay, I'm going to do this one for the fee, or, you're invested in it in whichever way. Like, we've worked hard for, the names that we've created in our spaces, and I think like that is really important to all of us, is to be proud of that, because we're so proud of what we did in our field of play, but taking it to a whole different world can be a little daunting at times when you're not in full control. Like if I didn't win a competition, I knew that was on me. I had to go back to the gym and work harder and do more beam routines so I didn't, mess up the next time. But in a world where you're putting yourself out there and you're putting your name and you're attaching it to certain brands or companies that at the end of the day, you don't really have that full control, over an employee at that brand or company. So you really, really have to align with like the brand and their missions. And I think just breaking it down even further, like, can you go to sleep knowing that, you're proud to be part of that, And I think so often it feels at times that, especially in a very curated world of social media, it can feel sometimes, fake, what you see out there. And so I think knowing that if you can just be your authentic self, then you're not acting. You're not trying to be something that you're not. You're not trying to figure out, how do I align, how do I change who I am, or how do I align my missions all of a sudden with this brand? So I think it really just simplifying everything, and do I like it? Does it align with me? Am I, like, the alignment is so important. I think sometimes just, forgotten at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And social media has initiated a branding universe for athletes to build their brands and monetize endorsements. What do you think the future of endorsements looks like specifically for female athletes, Megan?
I think that you're gonna, and I think you're already seeing it, but a lot more ownership in companies, a lot more of like endorsement via investment in those companies and getting those opportunities. There's, we sort of hear all the time about, I don't know, whether it's like Shaq had like an early investment in Uber. It's like, that's because he got given this opportunity to invest in Uber. Yes, he had to like make that decision, but oftentimes women don't get that opportunity, or they aren't valued in a way that's going to give them a meaningful portion of an investment as a brand partnership. So I think that's going to be a big one. I also think athletes are going to create their whole like business sphere themselves around that. I think there's a few athletes who have already started to do that, and definitely from a younger age. I mean, I think the thing about women's athletes in particular, I think just all the numbers and engagement and data kind of shows like we're more engaging than male athletes. Like our content is more engaged with, we're more authentic. We're talking about real life issues because those are the things that intersect with women's sports. Maternal health intersects with women's sports, contraceptives, reproductive rights, like racism, misogyny, sexism, women's empowerment, all of it really authentically intersects with women's sports in a way that's like very real. Our spaces are inclusive, our games are inclusive, and it's different than men's sports. And it's not to say one is necessarily better than the other, but it's a brand new business opportunity, I think, at large, that women are going to be the face of. And so I think that's kind of the biggest thing. It's less gonna be about like, okay, you're the best athlete, so you get the money and get to be the face of something. First of all, women never get to do that because we don't get valued on just what we're doing. It's never, if you're the best male soccer player, it doesn't matter if you're handsome or not. But if you're the best female soccer player, it definitely matters. And I think with that sort of like changing that business model into something that's a little bit more meaningful, but I think now athletes are like, oh, I'll just do it myself. They're making enough money now. Their contracts are enough money now where they can sort of craft that themselves. And I feel like that's sort of the way that things are going, whether that's owning their own content. I think on the men's and the women's side, owning their own content, putting out their own content, whether it's on YouTube, building brands themselves or being investors in brands. So just a lot more ownership. I think there has sort of traditionally been this like, dumb athlete thing where it's like, well, you don't really know what you're doing. And so like we're going to do it for you, and we're going to get the lion's share of the money and everything, and sort of leave the athlete out of it a little bit. And I think the athlete's going to have much more influence in that now.
Yeah, I would add to that. It is true. It's almost like there's been this one size fits all for athletes, and it started on the men's side, and then women were just kind of put into that. And honestly, everything Megan said, and I'm just going to add this one piece, which is, Allison Felix recently, I think today, announced that she's starting her own sports management fund, and it's bespoke, it's for women, and that is going to change how you see women, female athletes conduct their business. It's going to be totally different. It's going to be, I think, through the lens of what our lives are like as athletes, and not just this lens of, oh, this is what male athletes do, let's try to copy and paste that over here. And so I'm excited to see what it is, because even in the world of women's basketball, we're already starting to see it because of the NIL. I would argue that NIL impacted women's basketball more than any other sport. And the reason why I argue that is because, yes, there's football players, men's basketball players making a ton of money in NIL, but they were probably going to make that when they turned pro anyway. It's not really, they're just getting it a little sooner. Whereas for women's basketball players, it's this whole other world. They're getting all this money that they may never have gotten. And what I'm hearing from the Caitlin Clarks, from the Paige Beckers, from the Cameron Brinks, Juju Watkins, is they're already starting to form their own businesses. They're already starting to do exactly what we're talking about, and exactly what Allison Felix is about to focus on. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
I have to say gymnastics the same for the NIL, because
Yeah,
there's no
fair.
there's no professional league after college, but
Absolutely. Oh, you will add that to my talking point? Thank you.
no, but it's incredible. It truly is, and especially in a sport that is so short-lived. It's changed quite a bit now. I mean, thanks to athletes like Simone, but I was 18 at the Olympics, and I was quote unquote over the hill. What? At the time, the perfect age was 15 turning 16 Olympic year. And it's just to think that, you are old at 18, what? So I think regardless of that, college gymnastics is so different than, a lot of the other sports, where once you finish college gymnastics as a female, there is no professional league, and there really isn't any. Very, very, very rare would somebody then go back to elite gymnastics and try to make an Olympic team. Not saying it can't happen, but it's kind of just the way that the sport has worked in the past.
Now, you mentioned Allison Felix, and traditionally it's been tailored for men, and they just kind of impose that on women. What are some of the unexpected barriers that you all experience when building your brands that you've encountered?
Unexpected? Yeah. Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all the things we're talking about, I feel like, is exactly what we all have come up against, which is the sexism aspect, the copy and paste aspect. And when I say that again, I just mean, we did it, this is how we did it for the men, so we'll just do it over here. So nothing, to be honest, I'd have to sit and think, unexpected?
No, I mean, we know it, yeah. I feel like all women know
It's more so been about fighting.
Yeah, I think it's more in what I'm so excited to see with Allison, and I think as we've gotten older and taken much more of our business sort of in-house and under our control, it's the way that we know how to talk about us, and therefore sell us or pitch us or explain why we're, because really that's what we're still having to do is sort of still explain why we're worth investing in, or why we're worth this brand deal, or why women's sports, even though every single metric ever is proving the investment should be there, the TV rights should be there, the sort of larger investment around women's sports should really be there. We're the ones who know how to talk about it, and it's like storytelling, and you are convincing people. People have so many thoughts in their heads around people don't really watch that, or people aren't really interested in that, or people don't really want to see that from women, and that's just not true.
Who are the people?
I know, men. I mean, honestly, you guys, it's men. Spoiler. But it's the brands, and it's the decision makers. So I feel like that's I wouldn't say I'm surprised about it, but I think the ability to, at the very least, do it yourself and actually narrate yourself or your business or your pitch in a way that basically forces the other side to be like, yes, I hear you, and like I'm still gonna say no. Like I think that's my favorite thing in a pitch or any of this is like you're gonna have to say it back to me and in my face. We're not gonna pretend like all of this isn't happening. And I think the more women are taking things back in their own hands, whether it's storytelling or ownership or narrative or CBA construction, the better results that we're getting.
I thought of something.
Okay.
Okay, this has been unexpected. We've all fought and clawed for so long to prove our value, to say we're worth investing in. It's definitely starting to change. It has happened. And again, I'm very basketball centric. And now that viewership numbers have increased the way they have, and now that attendance has increased the way it has, I mean, even at the Olympics, the gold medal game had 10 million people watching that gold medal game, which is amazing. I think it's up like, every time I'm opening up my social media, it's like, oh, this game's up 130%. It's like the numbers are crazy. So now we were trying to tell people we had value. Now we actually have the data. We actually have the numbers to prove it. So we can walk in rooms and present that. And what's been unexpected is most times you're met with, but is this real? Oh, great job, but is it going to keep going? So it's like, you already made us have to prove it. We did. And now you're still doubting it. That has been unexpected.
It's almost like the goalpost is moving.
It always moves, right?
So weird.
Sue and Megan, in your last podcast, you mentioned that you like the metadata and the story within the story. You all have projects that you're working on. What narratives are you looking forward to telling right now that are not being told at the current moment? Megan, I'll start with you.
Women, really. The narratives around women's sports, which are going to involve all the things that we talked about from like a social impact standpoint, from an equality, from a progress standpoint, but we've seen, I think women's basketball has been I was gonna say craziest, but it's actually maybe the most expected for us, narration of what's happened this year, like the racism around Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark and how it's being, there's the perfect example, we talked about it maybe a podcast later. So the game that Caitlin Clark played in her first playoff game, I think like 2 million people or 1 million something, I don't know, a bunch of million people watched the game. Great. Her team was a last seed, they got swept, they moved on to another game. The Liberty and the Aces played, and like almost 1 million people watched the game, which is a huge number, up massively from last year. It's like everything's up. And Stephen A. Smith gets on TV and says, viewership numbers are down in the game that Caitlin Clark didn't play in. And while that is technically true, that's not really true of what's happening actually. And so without anybody else there to say, yes, okay, technically more people watch, which by the way, when LeBron James plays, that number is going to be huge. And when he does, nobody said that about the Celtics and Mavs series last year in the finals, that like less people are watching this because LeBron James isn't playing. Nobody said that. Why do we have to say that about women's sports? So if nobody is there to actually say like really what's happening with a platform like Stephen A. Smith, which I think he's using it irresponsibly and takes a lot of time to put women down on it, then like people are going to be like, oh, like the W's down. And that's just like categorically untrue. So I think for us, what we want to do on our podcast is, of course, have fun and, share our experience about our lives in women's sports, but then also to try to give a more accurate narrative on how much women's sports are growing across every sport. Like you mentioned, the NIL numbers out of women's gymnastics are crazy. People watching women's gymnastics in the Olympics, crazy. Women's soccer, 9 million people watch the game. Women's basketball, 10 million people watch the game. Women dominated all of the storylines. NWSL attendance up, record-breaking attendance numbers, TV viewership, ticket sales, everything. WNBA the same. So it's like it's all going up. So that's really what I want to focus on, and I think we want to focus on, is telling what's really happening and like giving our sports and women's sports in general the sort of rightful and correct narration of what is happening and the way that the business is growing, not only because it's the right thing to do, but this is the way that you grow the business. This is the way that you get a bigger media deal and a more lucrative media deal and a better CBA for the players and more brand investment and more investment into teams and higher valuations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I would just add, the way I see it is there's an ecosystem of media coverage. And when you look at men's sports, they have much more of a balance, right? So you have a talking head or you have a hot take, but then you might have like the beat reporter that's following the team and gives, again, just much more of a balanced take. And it all exists. And you never get too high on a hot take or too low on a hot take. You kind of understand it's probably somewhere in the middle. And what we've seen in women's sports recently is because in that ecosystem there isn't the balance, and because a lot of the mainstream media that have now entered women's sports have larger platforms, Megan obviously mentioned Stephen A. Smith, there's a bunch of people, you're only getting one side of a story. You're only getting like the heat of the hot take and not the balance. And I think that's where all of us really are uniquely positioned to enter that ecosystem and provide a little bit of that balance because we have such an understanding. And the best example, you know, sadly for Caitlin, is Caitlin Clark. And I can just sit here and tell you, I promise you nobody was trying to hurt her intentionally. I know for a fact. I watched the games the whole 9 yards. But, you know, we joked about it on one of our recent pods, like, I can't even tell you how many people. One of them was Megan's mom. Some of them were like friends of friends being like, hey, why are the WNBA players trying to hurt Caitlin? What? But that's an example, and I'm sure you guys have all heard it at some point. That's an example of a hot take going left, going right, up, down, all over, and all of a sudden it becomes true. And that's really, I think, partly what we want to do is fight those types of narratives and just kind of course correct and add our voices into that ecosystem, because all of that has to happen. The talking heads do have to exist, right? The hot takes do have to exist.
And what about new projects that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think to add on to that and like what you both said about balance, you know, and I think maybe so many people look at athletes like us or, you know, any professional athlete really out there and see how much success maybe one has achieved, and you can sit at home, whether you're watching the Olympics on TV or watching a WNBA game or something, and you can kind of make yourself believe that, okay, but that's not relatable because like I will never be that good, or I will never be that, you know, good of an athlete or win a gold medal or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, we all share such similar stories, because how did we get to that moment? It wasn't because we had good days every single day. Do you think like training 7 hours a day, 6 days a week for, 15 plus years? Like,
by your dad?
Yeah, by my dad, yeah. Was easy? No, absolutely. Did I ever want to quit? Absolutely. And so it's how do you get through those hard moments? You know, how do you get yourself back up when the world seems to hate you, or so social media kind of says, or so your coach says, or whatever it is? And I think for me personally, I didn't really even understand what that was like until I tried to make my second Olympic team, and I didn't. And I remember going into that Olympic trials as the very best in the world. And so when you're the best in the world, you're expected to be the best, if not better. And here I was, like, more pressure, more expectations, more everything. And on my best event, the uneven bars, I fell flat on my face. You can YouTube it. I remember, like, laying there on the mat, small concussion after that. Mats are not that soft, and I was so embarrassed. I was so mortified. I wanted to crawl underneath the podium, and my dad just became a dad, not a coach anymore, because he wanted to make sure I was okay. And he said, "You can be done. It's okay. It doesn't matter anymore." And I said, "No, you always told me that no matter what I do, I have to finish what I've started." So I got back up, finished that routine, knowing that it didn't matter. My dream of making a second Olympic team was over. I had just embarrassed myself in front of millions watching at home, 20,000 people in the arena. I landed on my feet, and for the very first time in my life and career, I had a standing ovation for the worst routine of my entire life and career. And that, to me, was a moment that I will forever remember, and not just remember, but that became the defining moment of my career. Because when I won the Olympic all-around gold medal in gymnastics, nobody was on their feet. They were clapping and cheering and telling me congratulations, but it was when I literally fell flat on my face, I got up, I finished my routine, and I landed on my feet. 20,000 people were on their feet with me. And thank you.
Yep.
And so I think it's sharing more of those stories as well. It's sharing the stories that, you know, you don't necessarily see on TV, or you don't realize that athletes like us are just like all of you and, you know, everybody else watching at home. And I think it's the vulnerability, and it's the, you know, kind of making you feel like we're superheroes. Yes, we know. I'm just kidding. But I think it's humanizing all of us at times, because we are, you know, we train our whole life to be able to be as good as we were or are, or, you know, whatever it is. And I think at times it almost makes it so unrelatable, yet we all are humans going through the same exact thing every single day. So I think for me personally, it's, you know, everything that they said, and just sharing those moments of, whether it's vulnerability, whether it's picking yourself up after you fall on your face, embarrassment, whatever it is that you may be going through, just try to keep going and try to finish what you've started no matter what.
In the last 30 seconds, this could be for anyone. I have a question. So for all the new women's sports have exploded, and for all the new eyeballs that are on it and people that are coming to it that don't know it, what would be the message that you would give them? Come on, Sue, be honest.
Like, enjoy. It's pretty dope. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe ask more questions than have more answers. That's been coming a lot. I think of people, it's not exactly the same as men's sports. It really isn't. So be curious, be open, enjoy it. You're going to love it. It's like sports are sports are sports, and that's why we love them. They're this live event where you're seeing people in their most vulnerable state, which is trying their very hardest with other people or alone to like do the thing that they're trying to do. That's a very vulnerable thing. So it's amazing. And I think, yeah, just being curious and also like respecting the vibe of the space that is different from men's sports.
I think it's a great place to end. Be curious and respect the people. Thank you all.
Thank you.